Good evening, everybody. Today is the first WideShut Webcast of 2011. I am, of course, Keelan Balderson, and you can find all of my articles and videos at wideshut.co.uk. And for everything Resistance Radio, keep it locked here at blogtalkradio.com/Resistance Radio and resistradio.com. Really cool song there at the start, but I've actually forgot who sings it. So I can't really give you a link to the song because I don't know what it is. The file name of the song is Fine Line, but I did a little Google and there's about 1 million songs called Fine Line, and I can't really find the artist. Because I don't think she's very well known, the lyrics aren't on the internet either. Whoever you are, I love your song, so yeah. Interesting topic today. As you may or may not know, it's been an interesting couple of days for me. I decided to get out there on the streets and spread a bit of info, because I'm basically known as what you'd call a keyboard warrior. Most of my work has been online, and there's no problem with that. In fact, I can reach far more people on YouTube and my website than I can in the high street. But after seeing the student protests and just this general ramping up of the spirit of resistance, just for me personally, almost like on a psychological level, I just needed to get out there and sort of test the boundaries of the system and see how far I could push myself to sort of spread some info about. And there's something quite liberating about actually talking to people face to face about some of these things. And I've just been itching to do something, so I got out there on the streets on New Year's, handed out some info, and I think that's something we can all probably start doing. I mean, if the internet is switched off or gets limited in some way, the resistance doesn't just stop there. We have to think of other ways of reaching people. And traditional activism, and just the simple act of handing out flyers in a high street, is one of those back to basics things that we can all do, and we should do if things go sour on the internet, because we all know they are trying to censor things. There's all sorts of things going on behind the scenes in regard to the internet, so it's just an avenue we can think about. And I think it's always good just to gauge the reactions of the average person in the street. I like to just stand there sometimes and just watch society from a distance as it goes about its business. It's quite a thought-provoking experience just to see people, in this sort of ant-like controlled system. They think they're free, but you just look at them and they're all walking like clockwork into the shops, going to work, whatever. I'm sure if you viewed it from space, it would almost look like a computer system working. And I sometimes just like to go out there and just look and ponder the world. So maybe if you ever have the time, I think it's a good idea just to step out of the chat rooms, the message boards, the blog talk radio shows, and just get a sense of the average person's reality. Because sometimes I think we close ourselves off into a community and we think we sound relatively sane. I mean, we are the sane ones, but the average person's mindset, they're not hearing any of this. And it's nice to just get a kick up the ass sometimes and realise that we still have quite a way to go, with this thing. So I don't know how many of you actually saw my video, which I'm going to get to. It's on my YouTube channel. It's called WideShut Breach of the Peace, with a question mark, because I obviously didn't breach the peace. But I'll paste this into the chat just in case you have or haven't seen it. So basically it was New Year's Eve, probably not the best day to go out and, upset the Matrix, but, it was a bit of a toss-up. There's lots of shoppers out on New Year's Eve, lots of people to reach. I'd recently bought a megaphone. I was really excited about going out there and exercising my free speech and lawful protests, and just to burn a bit of steam off on that megaphone. And just a few minutes in to handing out the leaflets, me and my camera guy, Liam, were stopped by 2 police officers and essentially threatened with breach of the peace. This is before we even got onto the megaphone. So afterwards I thought, maybe we shouldn't go on the megaphone if handing out leaflets is such a crime. So it's a bit deflating to have a confrontation in such a short amount of time. It was literally 5-10 minutes into giving out leaflets and trying to chat with the people in the street. And I think it's just a pure example of how society has become so ignorant and so controlled in this matrix-like system that just the lawful act of handing out free information and filming in an open public area is so out of the ordinary to people that they feel it has to be stopped, that it must be illegal. I mean, you can't have people giving out information and filming on the street. The streets are there for shopping, It's just out of the ordinary to some people. And I don't think the police were bad people. They were just completely ignorant. And that's a major problem with this New World Order, or whatever you want to call it. Because people are so brainwashed, the elite don't need to use physical force on most people. They've learnt to accept their servitude. We don't need a sheepdog. The people themselves keep everybody in check. The police, they might not be going out there deliberately to sort of antagonise people and to essentially, they're not holding up the law. They might not be going out deliberately to do that, but they're just like any other person in the street. They've become so ignorant, and it's so alien to see somebody, doing something different in the high street, that they're likely to try and put a stop to it. And the situation was, I was basically handing out these leaflets about the UK Uncut movement. I think Britt talked briefly about it in a few episodes ago. I don't really agree with them fully, this UK Uncut movement. But I just wanted to make people aware of some of the loopholes that the large corporations can use to funnel their millions out the country untaxed. They use offshore accounts and all that good stuff. Because the poorest people are still forced to pay. But the large corporations can get away with taking billions that could have been taxed and simply paying it to their lovely wife in Monaco. There's 2 types of people that live in Monaco: tax evaders and drug barons. It's just double standards. And I know that's not news to us, but I just wanted to get out there and spread it to the average person. And this guy, Sir Philip Green, because he was knighted by the Queen for all his lovely corporate activities, he paid out a record dividend of 1.2 billion. That's the largest dividend ever paid out in Britain. But he paid it through an offshore account to his wife in Monaco. And you know what his reward for this was? He was given a job by our government to write a report on government spending. Okay, so this corporate scumbag essentially has some power over the spending of our money on behalf of the government. I'd say our money, there's not really any money involved. Our debt, the debt created in our names. And it's very simple. When the state and corporations merge, it's called fascism, folks. That's what it is. Fascism, it's as simple as that. You can't have corporations and people from the corporate world having power over government or working with government or, you know, switching jobs from being on the board of JP Morgan or Goldman Sachs and then coming into the government. That is the problem. That is one of the biggest problems that the Western world faces right now. Daniel Esterlin, the Bilderberg researcher, you know, some of us call it the New World Order, you know, people call it global governance. Daniel Esterlin, who researches Bilderberg, he calls it One World Company Inc. And I wouldn't necessarily disagree with him. When governments are taking orders and bribes from corporations and bankers, you know, there's an argument that it's not really a world government we're facing, it's more like a world corporation. Excuse me. And actually, I don't know whether it's set in stone, but I did a quick Google before the show about Bilderberg 2011, and some people seem to think that it's going to be held in the UK. And if that's the case, folks, then every single one of us needs to get out there and protest that, because it's Bilderberg, folks. If Bilderberg is in the UK, then I'm going to be on the front lines. Let me just take a sip of water. But anyway, what I'm saying is, back to the point of the day, I don't actually agree with the concept of tax, because the UK Uncut movement is kind of still stuck in the paradigm. I don't agree with the concept of tax necessarily. And if I'd actually got a chance to get on the megaphone, I'd have gradually got to the point of explaining how our tax is really just a fraction of the interest on the national debt which we owe to the private banking system and the private corporate system. I would have got to the point that we need a new system, debt-free. That's my ultimate goal, debt-free money. The people issuing their own debt-free money to pay for the public services, so then we never get to a point where we're going to be in national debt, because everything we need can be created debt-free. So I was basically going to take the UK Uncut message and sort of then give my own solution to it all. You know, I don't think taxing the rich or the banks is the solution, because they'll just charge us more for their services to make up for it. You know, it's like the push for green energy. The big energy companies aren't going to pay for that move to green energy. We pick it up in the energy bills. And that's how it would work if we taxed banks or the rich who own the corporations. We need a complete overhaul of the system. But, you know, it starts with raising awareness about some of the corrupt activities of the corporations in this country, because people need to know why it's corrupt and how it's corrupt. So once we start informing them, then we can talk about the solutions. So my idea was to kind of, you know, do a bit of culture jamming, sort of ride the coattails of the UK Uncut thing, but then get to the more important issues. But obviously I didn't get there. Me and my friend just, you know, trying to be free human beings. You know, we were trying to do our own thing within the law. And because one man got a little annoyed because we caught him on film when I was giving him a leaflet, and that's perfectly acceptable. You know, people are allowed to be annoyed. This man who was annoyed at us, he's allowed his free speech to tell me that he disagrees about being filmed. That's fine, that's just life. People disagree in life, we're humans. But, any policeman out there, it's not illegal to disagree with other people. And that's what really bothers me about modern society. We're no longer allowed to offend anybody. Everything's politically correct. You know, people aren't allowed to make mistakes. Children can't run in some playgrounds because they might hurt themselves. Well, people are allowed to hurt themselves. You know, in order to protect this group's rights, we have to take somebody else's rights away, because they've divided us all up into different sects, and then they say, oh, this group needs their rights, so everybody's rights everybody's rights end up getting taken away. And I'm going to paste a bit of a sensational story that I did for WideShut a little while ago, but it just illustrates my point. This story was essentially put forward about a year ago, that Britain could end up banning skirts, dresses, as part of, young girls' school uniforms, because it could offend transgender students. And this is what I'm getting at. In order to please everybody, in the long run, we're taking everybody's rights away. What about the girl's right to wear a skirt? And that's just a bit of a cheesy example. But we've got to this point where the government tells us what we're allowed to do, and we have all this legislation and equality bills and all this rubbish. And it gets too complicated. You can't do anything. We're supposed to have inalienable rights, inherent rights that we're born with, and then the government's just supposed to protect those, and anything else goes. So this gentleman got upset that we were filming him, and that's absolutely fine. We did explain to him that it wasn't an offence. I know we didn't have the camera in his face or nothing. My mate was filming me, and this guy raised his voice a bit and gave his opinion, which again is absolutely fine. We're both human beings. It doesn't have to go any further than that. And because he was upset, we decided out of respect to delete the footage. And he carried on with his day. He walked down the street, everything was fine. There's nothing wrong with that kind of human interaction. Two human beings having a bit of a dispute. What's wrong with that? No threats were made, no laws were broken. The problem was solved. And we were just going to carry on lawfully doing what we were doing. Because everybody else didn't seem to care, or they were too busy shopping to even notice what we were doing. However, the lovely Stamford police took it upon themselves to walk further up the high street, because they were further down. They could see us from the distance and saw what happened. And they took it upon themselves to come and stick their nose in where it didn't belong. If anything, they were the ones that caused any disturbance by blowing the whole situation out of proportion. I don't know, maybe they were bored and they just wanted something to do. Maybe they were that stupid that they honestly thought a couple of people having a conversation in the street was worth an investigation. I don't know. But right away, we were treated as criminals. Two young guys out to annoy people. Young nuisances, just messing about. And that's clearly not the case. We weren't a group of chavs, slapping people and filming it on our phones. We weren't filming close-ups of, women's asses. We were giving out free information and trying to get a dialogue going with people in the street. But the problem is, it's like it doesn't compute. It didn't get through to the police's brains that two people could actually be using their right to free speech and freedom to film. And unless more people get out there and make this a common occurrence, we'll eventually lose that right to free speech and freedom to film simply through ignorance. We'll get to a point where people won't even know what free speech is, because people haven't done it for so long, because it's become so alien that people simply won't do it anymore. It appeared to me that the police had obviously never come across people filming in the street. It is a small town, but and I'm guessing in other small towns it's not a common occurrence to have people film in the street and hand out leaflets and use megaphones and stuff. So if we don't start using those rights, then we're going to lose them in the long run, because people are just not going to realise they exist. At least in the small towns. We've become so used to obeying authority. It's now normal to be tracked and traced everywhere by CCTV. And if you watch the video, I think the male officer made a very telling point. He said, there's a general expectation in society that if, we walk around town or whatever, we expect to be filmed by CCTV, but we don't expect to be filmed by citizens. And he said that as if it was, sort of a fact of life. But if you ask me, that's a very dangerous way we're heading. That people are happy to be tracked and traced by CCTV secretly, but they're not happy to be caught in the background of a harmless video filmed by other citizens. And as I told the officer, that's obviously then one rule for them and one rule for the people. One rule for the police and the corporations that have CCTV outside their shops and all that kind of stuff, and another rule for the average person in the street. That's not how it works. There actually isn't any separate rules. I can film, the CCTV can film. That's just the way it is. It's just they've built up a psychological rule in their heads that they've created mentally, where they think there's a difference, where they think that authority and police and corporations are bigger than the average citizen. But actually, in a public place, there's no perception of privacy, and citizens have the exact same freedom to film as the police and the corporations. And this guy, this policeman, didn't even realise that. He didn't really realise how hypocritical he was being. Just stop and think. How many times on the news do you see footage of high streets where they're talking about the economy maybe, and they get a shot of lots of people walking down the high street? How many times on the news do reporters go up to citizens in the street and talk to them and film them? I actually went onto the Lincolnshire, which is the county, their YouTube channel, the Lincolnshire Police, and had a scroll down, and they had a couple of videos where they were quite clearly filming members of the public for different reasons. One was like a neighbourhood watch video, one was like a exhibition they were doing in the centre of the town. But there was plenty of people caught on these cameras that obviously didn't know they were on these films. But it's this ignorance, this, I guess you could call it a form of cognitive dissonance, where because it's unusual for regular citizens to film, and because the officer thought he had power over me, and because he wants to win an argument, and that's just natural human behaviour, wanting to win an argument. But because of all these things, he was perfectly happy to try and take away my freedoms. And on a conscious level, he's probably not even aware that he's doing it. And that's the big problem. This is as much a psychological brainwashing problem as it is, a physical new world order being put into place. It's a mind prison. It's a matrix. And the lady officer, who was probably, I'd say, the more ignorant of the two, she couldn't even understand why I was filming her. And she got quite annoyed about it. Hello, you're public servants. We have every right to film you, covertly or not. I thought it was more polite to have it by my side and actually sticking it in her face. What about all the corporations that record telephone calls without telling you? What about all the covert surveillance that police do? It's this double standards. And she even had the gall to ask me why I was harping on about, why are you harping on about it being an offence and not being an offence? Why do you think? Because it's not an offence. It's not an offence to film. So there's absolutely no grounds for her to come to talk to me. What was their purpose of being there if no law had been broken? It'd be like if somebody was hopping on one leg and the police stopped them and started going on at them about hopping on one leg. They'd be like, what the hell are you on about? I'm just hopping on one leg. Of course I'm going to get annoyed. Of course the person hopping on one leg's going to get annoyed. There was no law broken. And there couldn't be a breach of the peace because the man who was originally annoyed had already left. He'd gone. We'd sorted everything out. So the only people causing a nuisance were the police officers. And what worries me the most is I don't think they even know the law. I don't think they even knew that filming was a free and open thing to do. That's what worries me the most, that we could have people on our streets supposedly protecting our rights and our freedom and upholding the law, and they don't even know the laws that they're supposed to be upholding. You see loads of videos on the internet where people are like, well, under what law are you trying to arrest me? Can you give me the statute and all this kind of stuff? And they'd have no idea. There's so many laws and statutes and acts and all this crap that, in a way, it's quite difficult for them to know it all. And that tells me that we need to perhaps scale back this system and go back to common law. And of course, if they did know that it was perfectly fine for me to film and give out information in the street, then what was their goal? Why were they harassing me if they knew full well that it was perfectly fine to do what I was doing? To me, it seemed like they were talking me into a corner, or even waiting for me to get angry, so they could have an excuse to arrest me, because I would have got to a point of, just blowing my top and getting angry about it. It's almost like, psychological kettling. Just keep squeezing them, bit closer, keep talking more illogical bollocks to them, and eventually they're going to lash out. And I did end up raising my voice at the end, and that was basically what set them off. The point where I said, I'm well within my rights to do this, etc. That's what set them off. So that, to me, it almost seems like that was their goal. If they knew the law. If they didn't know the law, it's probably an even scarier situation that we have people that don't know the law. But right at the end of the video, or at the end of the confrontation bit of the video, the male officer kind of jumped on me when I was sort of raising my voice. He kind of fed on that anger. And then he asked me, have you ever been in trouble with the police before? Well, if you put that into context, what he was basically saying is that I was in trouble right now. As if stating my case and stating that I have rights and that what I'm doing is not illegal, as if that's some kind of troublesome behaviour. And where it went sour, which was immediately after that, when he asked, whereabouts are you from? And again, staying well within my rights, I told him I'm not obliged to tell you that. And it doesn't really matter. Why does it matter? There's no law broken. And at that point, that's when things kind of went bad. You can't really see it on the film because I had the camera pointing to the floor. But both of them turned at that point. You could sort of see it in their eyes. The man, the male officer, sort of put his hand on his vest as if to go reach for something. I thought he was getting his cuffs out or something. But it seemed to be just a scare tactic. He didn't actually pull anything out. And then the woman quickly grabbed out her notepad. It was like some kind of mind control trigger. I don't give them the details and then, the alter takes over. Just really odd behaviour. And that's why I turned my camera off when she asked, because I could tell by looking at them They'd kind of stepped forward, he'd reached for his thing, it looked like something bad was going to happen. And in hindsight, I should have kept the camera on and pointed it right at them. But, you know, in the moment, and me not really having interacted with police much, you know, and I didn't want to spend time in a cell on New Year's Eve and miss my train home and all that kind of thing, I did end up complying and turned off the camera. And I'm not happy about that, but there's the reason why I did it. There is a reason. So as soon as the camera went off, we had a little sort of argument going back and forth, and the female officer then just declared a breach of the peace has occurred. No, no, it didn't. Where's she getting that from? If we read out what a breach of the peace actually is, I took this from an online law dictionary. A breach of the peace is an old common law concept which is used to prevent unlawful violence against people or property. Peace in this context refers to the Queen's peace and should be taken to mean the opposite of war. A breach of the peace is not a criminal offence in itself, however special powers exist for the purpose of stopping or preventing anyone from breaching or threatening the peace by committing unlawful violence. The concept of breach of the peace is difficult to define, yada yada yada, but the case law defines it as an act done or threatened to be done which either actually harms a person or in his presence his property, or is likely to cause such harm. Harm is defined as any physical damage to something or someone. So, as defined by the law that these two officers were supposed to uphold, a breach of the peace definitely didn't occur, and it couldn't have possibly occurred. It would only have happened if I'd touched the man that was upset, or if I'd punched him, or if I'd threatened to punch him. So it's blindingly obvious to me that there was no possible way that anybody could have thought that a breach of the peace had taken place. And if a breach of the peace had occurred, and that's what they thought, you'd think they'd have arrested me straight away instead of standing there blabbing away and then just getting annoyed when I was standing my ground. If anything, they were trying to provoke me into causing a breach of the peace. So this brings me to our next point. They only actually said a breach of the peace had occurred after they ordered us to switch off the cameras, and only after we refused to give our details. So, you know, the more I think about it, it means there'd have been no evidence to go against their claim of a breach of the peace. So if they were inclined to make it up, which they seem to be doing, it would have been our word against theirs. And it was when we didn't give our details that things really kicked off. But the law states as long as a crime hasn't been committed, you're not obliged to give your details when an officer asks. So it seems to me that in order to get our details, they were willing to make up that a breach of the peace had occurred. Now eventually, you know, we basically said sorry, we agreed with everything they said, and they backed down. But if I'd have kept going, they would have arrested me for breach of the peace, and they would have got my details, and I would have spent hours in a cell. Obviously they'd have let me go without charge, because that's how it always seems to happen if you look at other people that have done this sort of thing. But it's just a giant scam. And I'd hate to think that the police in this country were actually trained to act that way. I mean, I said at the start, I thought maybe it was more ignorance than them being calculated in what they were doing. But maybe they were just playing dumb. Maybe they knew exactly what they were doing. Maybe the plan the whole time was just to gradually, talk us into it, sort of thing. I don't know. But all I do know is that some police in this country, whether ignorantly or not, are actively trying to take people's freedoms away. And unless we challenge them, unless we stand up for ourselves, unless we go out there and do these things, then it's just going to get worse. And as I said before, I've never really been active on the streets. I haven't really dealt with police before. When I was younger and used to skateboard, I used to get moved along and stuff. But I've never actually dealt with the police since being awake, since knowing most of my rights. I've given out swine flu leaflets and stuff before, but I've never had a problem. So it is still a learning curve for me. And looking back, now, I wish I'd been a little more assertive, but everyone starts their journey somewhere. And obviously next time I'll probably be a bit more prepared to call them out on their bullshit. And I hope that more people can get out there and spread a bit of truth. Because unless we shock them out of this system, unless we expose how corrupt they are by confronting them, by filming it and showing other people, then we're just going to ignorantly walk further and further into tyranny without realising it. Most people, remember, don't know their rights. I think I'm just going to go to a quick break, put a song on or something, and then I'll come back and maybe get into a few headlines or, just a few other things. Let me find a decent song. I think I deleted most of mine. How about Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers? Okay, that was Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers, Won't Back Down. One of my favourite mainstream bands there. Anyway, we've not got long left. I didn't really want to make the whole show about me, but, you know, I know some of you, you know, this is old news to some of you. It's kind of obvious that we live in a corrupt society and we've got out of control police that don't know the law. But I think to those that perhaps haven't gone out to the streets yet and you know, spreaded a bit of information, it might have been useful, you know, just to learn from my experience, and maybe some of you guys can get out on the streets in the future and film some of your interactions, and then we can learn from those experiences, so we can continue to see how the system operates, and then we can refine our tactics and really get this thing going. You know, we can't leave it all up to Charlie Veach or you know, people like Darren Pollard who's done a few things like this, or you know, We Are Change Brum gets out there every now and then and films things. We can't leave it all up to these people. It only becomes successful when everybody does it. You know, they're trying to be the change that they want to see. But unless other people sort of follow suit or do their own thing, then it's futile. It's just a guy filming stuff for people's entertainment on YouTube. That's not what it's supposed to be about. You know, you don't have to copy people's style. You don't have to copy what I do. You don't have to be funny like Charlie Veach. Maybe you're hot-headed. Maybe you'd prefer to go out there with a bullhorn, you know, full tilt like Alex Jones, and that's fine. Maybe you're a little more reserved like me and just want to hand out information and chat with people, and then perhaps get on the megaphone and spread a couple of messages. That's fine as well. Maybe you've got something more specific that you'd like to do, but now's the time to do it. We can all do different things, but I think we've actually got to start doing them. That's the point. Because as I said, in quite a few episodes, something's brewing in this country. We've already had riots. There's an atmosphere of revolution. But unless we educate enough people before anything mass kicks off, their energy is going to be wasted, and we're going to fall back into the left-right paradigm. You know, we're already seeing it. Oh, the Tories, the Condems are liars, so people are going to vote Labour in next time. Well, don't forget Labour are complete scumbags as well. We can't fall back into the paradigm. And if things really do get nasty, we don't want to fall into a police state either. Because if shit hits the fan, a lot of normal people are just going to want to lash out at the system. But unless they understand the system, they're always going to lose. You know, what's the art of war thing? You've got to know both yourself and your enemy. You know, you'll win 100 battles that way. But if you don't know yourself or your enemy, you've lost already. So we have to educate people. We need to get out there and educate some people, so they are aware of these things before shit does hit the fan. Something I did want to note before we go today. If you listen to Lee's show, you'll have noticed that a caller, somebody called in and made a few claims about himself. You know, I personally didn't quite understand what he was on about. Then his Skype or Blog Talk Radio or something, you know, ballsed up as it usually does. So he got cut off. And I asked him to email me some of this stuff because I didn't really get what he's saying. Maybe he'd like a story being done on my website, or, you know, some more exposure on the radio, whatever. He did email me, but it was kind of pages of transcripts and other emails he'd sent to other people. I couldn't really make heads or tail of it. So, you know, if you're listening, whoever that was, or if anybody else, you know, wants to send information, we're perfectly happy to take that information. I've done exclusive stories before. I did one on a guy named David Emsley and, you know, his run-ins with the corrupt Grampian police. I did one on a lady called Elizabeth Doherty and how she was put through a whole system of abuse since being a child and how it tied back into the Scottish elite. Quite a harrowing story. So if you do have tangible information and you want to share it with people, we'll look at it. But please at least summarise what you want to say or what the point is, because we are all busy and we're not going to understand what you're on about if you just send tons of transcripts and strangely formatted emails and stuff. And then if you start accusing us of cutting you off deliberately or supporting the Zionists or whatever, then you're kind of wasting our time. So if you want to email me something that makes sense, I'll take a look at it. If not, I'm sorry, but we can't help you. Something else I wanted to talk about before we go today, I did have a few headlines. I think an obvious thing to talk about is the VAT rise over here in jolly old England. I'll just paste in a Guardian article. I think most people know the gist of what's going on. Where's the chat? There it is. Yeah, so basically VAT is going to rise back up from 17.5% to 20%. And here's what the Guardian says. VAT is obviously value added tax, which is a tax on all the products you buy, because everybody loves taxes, don't they? And the Guardian says today's VAT increase from 17.5% to 20% will cost each household around £520 a year extra, according to price comparison website Kelku, with economists predicting reduced consumer spending and plummeting retail sales as a result. Well, duh. You know, I don't really get it. How does increasing the VAT help the recession? We're not out of recession yet. All this is going to do is affect the spending power of the poor, because it basically means everything in the shops is now going to be a few percent more expensive. It's just making things more expensive, which in turn leads to less buying of products. So, you know, we can't buy as much because things are more expensive, which then leads to less profits for the corporations, or at least the smaller ones, which then means job losses, because in order to save their own asses, they'll obviously fire or put the wages down, which in turn makes it even worse. It's just an awful spiral out of control. And with more cuts coming, and the cuts already made that haven't quite taken effect yet, this isn't a good idea. No sane person could think this is a good idea. And on the news just before, you know, I was getting ready for the show, they were talking about how this will be the most stable way to pay off the deficit and all this kind of rubbish. They don't get it. The deficit and the national debt altogether is 4.8 trillion. What the hell are you talking about paying it back? That is never, ever gonna happen. We're far too far down the line for that to ever happen. All it means is we're debt slaves for life. And I know I'm preaching to the choir, but it's worth hammering home, because what we need is debt-free money. The ability for the people, through the institution of government, to print money debt-free, and then you sell that money into the, the public services, so that we can get hospitals and everything that we need, and we don't go into debt while it happens. Because every time we need money in this country, every time the government wants to use our names for money, they have to borrow it. It makes no sense. You can't ever get out of debt. It's absolutely ridiculous. And the ball's rolling even bigger every year because of the interest. It's just ridiculous to talk about things like the deficit and all that without talking about just getting rid of it. It's so annoying. And what angered me even more is this PR campaign that was going on every news channel today, particularly BBC, where they said the VAT will hit the richest the most. Well, yeah, but you've got to make the point that the only reason why it hits the richest the most is because they're the richest and they buy the most things. So because they buy more things, they obviously pay more VAT. As poor people, you know, minimum wage or whatever, working class people, we can't afford to buy many things because of the VAT rise. And it's just ridiculous. They think we're somehow going to get out of recession by increasing the VAT. It makes no sense. And people are going to start to notice that it makes no sense. And shit is going to hit the fan, and that's just the way it is, I'm afraid. Ridiculous. We just look at the chat, see if there's any interesting comments. 18-year-old one-armed Chinese man. Okay, fair enough. Yep, and it's gonna kill off small businesses. Everything always kills off the small businesses. The carbon taxes will kill off the small businesses because they can't afford to pay them, and then they won't be able to afford to expand, because as they expand they have to buy more carbon credits and all that kind of rubbish. It's always the people, and the people that want to help the economy or want to start up a business, a mom and pop store, that get hit the hardest, and they never tell you that. But what we get is this divide and rule situation where people think it's rich against poor. And it kind of is rich against poor, but the point is not to attack the rich because you lose. The point is to cut the rich out of the situation. We don't need the rich. Debt-free money, sod off then. You know, if we print debt-free money, the rich are irrelevant. They no longer have that power of owning the government. So they can get on with whatever they want. They can drive around in their Mercedes and stuff. I don't care. As long as it doesn't impinge on my free life, then fair enough. Run around with, you know, your suits and all this rubbish. I want to run around in my Hawaiian shorts. As long as you don't stop me from buying those Hawaiian shorts by taxing me to high heaven, then that's fine. Eat the bankers, eat the rich. I think we're going to upload that Aerosmith song, Eat the Rich. But yeah, that pretty much wraps it up for me today, folks. I hope you all enjoyed the show and it wasn't all just rambling about me. I hope I did put some points across that made sense to you all. And yeah, that about wraps it up. Same time, same place next week. We now have shows at 8 PM UK time every day. So you know where to be every day at 8 PM. So cheers, guys.